listening to On the Couch with Carly. Carly's couch is a safe space to talk. I'm a psychologist, but I'm not your pipe-smoking, tweed-wearing stereotype. Hello and welcome back to On the Couch with Carly. Today I have a special guest with me. I have Suna Hall on the couch today. Let me just tell you a little bit about Suna. So Suna and I actually met on a coaching course. Suna is an ADHD, neurodiversity, and executive function coach. And Suna's passion for helping neurodivergent teens, adults, and parents of neurodivergent children find ways to make life easier and overcome challenges. So in her coaching, she works with clients to build practical strategies, self-awareness, and systems that honor their unique wiring, whether that is navigating school, work, or family life. And Suna trained in psychology and social work in the early 2000s and has spent 22 years consulting in a nonprofit sector across strategy, fundraising, and communications. This has taught Suna about the power of systems change and the importance of inclusion, principles that she now brings into every coaching relationship. As a neurodivergent person herself, as well as a parent and a partner, she combines both professional expertise and lived experience, which helps her to create individually tailored coaching programs that are compassionate, practical, and effective. So today, we're going to talk about this work that you do, which I think is super interesting and will be relevant to a lot of people. So let's just start with the basics. We bandy about terms these days, neurodivergent. What is encompassed by this phrase? Like, what do we mean when we talk about neurodivergent individuals at the moment?
So neurodivergence, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's. It's basically a neurotype. So we're the neurodiverse community is, wanting to move away a little bit from it being a condition or a disorder and more as a difference in way in brain is wired. So you're born with it. It's like all research points towards it being genetic. There's a couple correlations between brain injuries as well, but it's very much a genetic disorder and neurotype.
Okay.
And it encompasses a wide variety, as I listed.
Okay.
Before.
And I don't know if you mentioned, if I just didn't hear, but you're also referring to people who are on the autism spectrum, people who have ADHD. In your practice,
yes.
Who do you see the most?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of conditions do people have that are in your practice?
Mostly ADHDers, both adults and teens. And then I would say probably a quarter of my practice is autistic individuals or parents of autistic children. And so the phrase Asperger's is now outdated. They've now scrapped that. And it's now just all couched under the autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, and then ADHD, obviously. And then a lot of parents of young kids I see are diagnosed with sensory processing disorders, auditory processing disorders, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia. So Tourette's is often a comorbid condition that comes with neurodiversity. So all of those people I see.
Yeah. And you are in at the moment particularly focused on coaching work. Tell me about coaching and how your coaching is. What does it mean to be a neurodivergent coach? What does a coach offer that a psychologist wouldn't, for example?
Of course. So a lot of people have those questions about the difference between therapy and coaching. I tell people coaching is very future and present focused. So it's very finite. So I tend to work with people for a limited amount of time, whereas therapy tends to be ongoing. And we really focus on where they are now and where they want to be, what's getting in their way, especially around things like executive function and emotional dysregulation and just skill building, kind of self-awareness. So I will, for instance, with a teenage client, I will, get them to kind of take stock of what's getting in their way, whether it's school or social stuff or their own emotional dysregulation. And then we'll come up with strategies and kind of skill building to give them a toolkit to kind of draw upon. And then they are then tasked to kind of go off into the world and implement those skills. And we check in throughout the time we work together, but eventually your kind of is to upskill them so that they go off and you are no longer needed. So it's not an ongoing thing. It's very skill and kind of goal oriented.
Yeah. And in terms of executive functioning, I know what that means, but maybe for my listeners who don't know, how would you,
definitely,
practically speaking, what are the skills that people are coming to your practice with, and how are you building that with coaching?
With neurodivergent people is that executive functioning is something that is a very common struggle and challenge. So executive function, it's kind of like the logistics and operations part of your brain. So it's like task initiation, task completion. So sometimes people really struggle. They feel extremely stuck to get something started, even though it's looming, even though it's kind of like in their awareness, they just can't motivate themselves to start the thing. And other times it's like they have 5 million things they've started, but completing any of them. So that's task completion and task initiation and task completion. Then there's planning and prioritizing, which often go with those things. So that's procrastination and kind of just organizing, time management. Those are all parts of executive functioning. Working memory is under executive function. And what working memory is, it's not, a lot of people confuse it with like what they call object permanence, which is also a term often used in psych, where once you don't see an object anymore, you forget that it's actually there. But what working memory is, so it's not that. When you leave the room and you put your keys down, you forget that where your keys are, but you know the keys are still there. Object permanence would be you forgetting that the keys are there at all. You just can't remember where you placed them. So that's part of working memory. It's kind of like the ability to hold little bits of information in your immediate memory rather than committing it to long-term or short-term memory. So it's just like, it's all that kind of admin-y stuff that we often get very frazzled by. ADHDers like myself often get very frazzled by, because it's just like they're all swimming in our immediate consciousness or our immediate brain, but we don't have the ability to put them down into like a category, or like so that would be a skill that we could build. Like, okay, let's put a bowl by the front door where your keys always go. And when you leave and when you come back, they just go in that bowl, so that you don't have to commit it to like, oh, I'm putting my keys here. This is where I've put my keys. I'm going to remember them for the next time I leave the house.
Right.
Those are all executive functions.
And while you're speaking, I mean, I think probably all of us could do with an executive functioning coach. I'm sure we could all optimize our executive functioning, right? We could all optimize our time management. We could all optimize our logistics and our prioritization of tasks. So what is it that's like, what are people, I wanted to just sort of riff off what you said when you said you feel frazzled. What are people with ADHD, or maybe who are on the autism spectrum, who come to your practice? Like, what are they feeling? Is it distinctly different from what all of us feel in our everyday life in terms of being frazzled and overwhelmed and having too many tasks and too many things on the to-do list? Or is there something particular about the lived experience of an ADHD mind or a person with autism?
So yes, it is distinct. It is distinctly different. So in order to be diagnosed, you hopefully are getting assessed by a professional, and there's a battery of what we call tools and tests, kind of measure your processing speed and your working memory and all these things, whatever age you are. And so it's more, in order to meet the criteria for diagnosis, it's more than just like, oh, I lose my keys. I get that all the time. Like, aren't we all a little bit ADHD, or aren't we all a little bit autistic? And I'm like, well, yes, we all struggle, like you said, with certain executive functions like time management or working memory or object permanence or, whatever it is. But do we all find it to the point where life really becomes extremely hard, right? It's not just, oh, it's annoying that I misplaced my keys today. It's like an ongoing struggle day after day, hour after hour, where your capacity to hold all these things is just not as good as a neurotypical, or not as polished, or not as honed. And so you are expending a huge amount of energy to hold all this information, and it's exhausting, and kids are really aware that there's a discrepancy between them and their peers, and adults who maybe are late diagnosed have always, there's all these common threads. And what you hear over and over is like, I knew I was different. I just didn't know what, how, or why. So that's kind of the indications of like, this is now diagnosable ADHD versus just being absent-minded, or just needing an executive function coach to kind of help you with some, implementing good systems that will help make your life run smoother.
Yeah. So I'm sure then the work you do like significantly impacts people's quality of life, and like allows them some space, like it frees up space for them to focus on like things they actually need to focus on, like joyful activities or work or school or things like that.
Family. Yeah. The things that just get, if you're in that kind of high alert, always go mode, because you're always aware of how much harder you have to work to get simple tasks done, it so much of your life, it impacts your ability to enjoy your relaxation time, because relaxation, A, you don't have time for that, and B, when you are relaxing, or when you're supposed to be relaxing, you spend it thinking about what you need to do next, and not actually like taking breaths and resting and recuperating.
And in terms of the parents, because I have a lot of parents that listen, what are the parents experiencing? What is difficult for them? What are they picking up on? What are they having to manage that they come to you with?
A good question. So, usually there are different stages in life that people tend to kind of have neurodiversity be flagged. And a lot of our generation of people were missed, because, especially women, because for a long time, girls were not flagged as even being potential to be ADHD or autistic. It was really thought to be primarily boys and men. So younger kids, really like, well, and I hesitate to kind of, because then I don't want to, the worst thing is to be a parent and to worry that your kid might be different, or might have a neurodiversity that's being unchecked. So not to alarm parents or kind of say like, this is definite, but it'll be kids, and especially care providers, caregivers, like your play school or preschool teachers, that are just kind of flagging, inflexibility. So, when you transition from one thing to another, that might be a particular red flag. Sensitivity, like to sensory sensitivity. So either sensory seeking, so always looking for like maximum impact. So stomping down the stairs, or being very hesitant with noise and very avoidant noise. So that's sensory avoidance or sensory seeking. And that, so a lot of schools will suggest as a first step OT and therapy, physio. So I'm American, so I have some different terminology. That's why I call it physical therapy, or PT. So OT and PT and speech therapy are often early signs that you might then eventually, need to see an ed psych or a pediatric neurologist to look further into the potential for ADHD and or autism. But yeah, those are kind of the early signs. I would say usually a school or a someone will flag that, your pediatrician or your GP will say, it looks like maybe speech therapy or physio or OT would be in order. That's usually the route most young parents of younger children go, that they often intervene with some kind of therapy along that road. And then eventually, after those things run their course, then they would be referred to pediatric neurologist or a neuropsychologist or a ed psych for assessment, depending on the age.
Yeah. And then by the time they come to you, so you mentioned that you work with parents. So what are they bringing to you in terms of their emotional experience, in terms of what is bothering them, or things that they want to work on, things that they can work on with you in your coaching program?
So most of my practice is teens and young adults and adults. And then I would say parents are about a quarter of my practice. So so I see kids who are 14 and older individually, and then 14 or 13 and younger, I would see parents. So that's often, there's issues at school. So they are coming to me with school stuff. So it's either academic or behavioral or emotional school stuff. So that would be working with the school to try and strategize ways to kind of scaffold the student. Sometimes it's home issues. So at school, the child is, usually, to use a neurodiverse term, high masking. So they're really on it at school and they're not showing any signs of their neurodiversity or struggling. But when they get home, they totally unmask and they are, they have a really hard time emotionally regulating or containing themselves. So then we would work on home strategies to kind of help their child feel well supported. A lot of times it's sibling stuff. So if the parents, often the parents are undiagnosed neurodiverse also, and that's something that often gets teased out while I'm supporting the child if the child has been recently diagnosed. But oftentimes there's a neurotypical child sibling and the neurodiverse child. So it would just be working on sibling dynamics and how, depending on what the neurodivergent profile is. If the child's non-speaking, then that's obviously the parents are working with a lot of support systems and support therapists. So maybe the other siblings are not having as much time with their parents. So it's strategies around that kind of stuff.
Wow. That sounds also helpful, and also it sounds like a lot of different things that you do in your practice. Wow.
Yeah. It's very diverse, which
Yeah.
I love. It's each is different. So that works well with my own neurodivergent brain because I like novelty and newness. So it helps.
Okay. It keeps you focused.
Yeah.
So, okay. So now I know a little bit about coaching because we did the one course together, but the best part for me about coaching is the sort of creativity element where you kind of meet a person and then you kind of look at them and form a picture of them. And then you kind of try to offer a new narrative or a new metaphor for them to step into, whatever. So tell me about that element of coaching. Like, do you feel like you have a one size fits all approach to your kind of executive functioning coaching style, or if you were going to, do time management, do you just hand out the same thing to every person, or do you feel that this work does offer you the opportunity to sort of meet a person and develop a program specifically for them? And then that's like that creative process of like adapting what you know for this individual.
Yeah, great question. So that's actually one of the things I love about coaching. What you were describing is that it's very co-creative. It's very collaborative. So absolutely no, I don't have kind of like a package or like a plan that just like I hand to them and then we work through it. It's completely individually created because each person is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what one person might be coming to me for is totally different than the next person. So there are themes, like we always start with kind of, I like to say, the pillars to kind of first just an entry point into, jumping off into like assessing where they're at. So that's like, what's their sleep like? What's their eating like? What's their if they have a spiritual practice, what's that like? What's their connection to others, exercise routine, and just general. Yeah, I think that's that. So we kind of look at the basic, foundations of you can't pour from an empty cup, so to speak. How are you in all those silos of your life? But then, we investigate, if it's sleep that's really problematic in your life, what is it? Is it falling asleep? Is it staying asleep? Is it that you're spending too much time on your screen? Is it that when you wake up in the middle of the night, you can't get back to sleep? And so then you sit and, perseverate on all your to-do list. If it's connection to others, what can be done to help build, enrich your life in terms of your relationships? Yeah. So each individual, and I would say more importantly, it has to, whatever they're coming to me for. So this kind of speaks back to the difference between therapy and coaching. Usually people are here for the what we call in our coaching training, the presenting problem. So they'll say, oh, my teenager, we just are fighting all the time. And when they get home, it's just like this, that, and the other. And that's, the initial presenting problem. But there's often stuff underneath of like, how the teenager feels, how you feel, what systems have been in place, what patterns are present, so that do we need to change things up? Do we need to look at, all the every aspect that goes into your relationship with your teenager? Does that factor into why when your teenager and you are meeting, especially for the first time in the day, it just turns into fireworks and explosions?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I think what I like about coaching is that it comes with a plan, and there's a kind of there's actions to take. With therapy, we do a lot of understanding and making sense of and meaning making, but very often people say to me, "But what must I do?" Not that they would listen to me if I told them, but they do want to know what to do. And I think what's useful with coaching is it sort of at least will give you the next step. You can sort of say, well, we can't say exactly where you're going to end up, but we can say, where do we want to grow towards? And maybe this would be one step in that direction. And I love that about coaching. Can you share, obviously without giving any sort of confidential information away, can you share maybe a success story of one of your coachees, that someone who came to you with a presenting problem, how you unpack that for them, help them to understand their neurodiversity, and then maybe what kind of steps did you take to actually shift some of their patterns or assist them in sort of, I don't know, developing, more optimal way?
Sure. I would love to think of one that is particularly relevant or applicable to your demographic, or the parents of younger kids. I had a client, a mom of a younger child who had some neurodiversity and learning issues and needed to change schools. So she was coming to me initially for that kind of, school, kind of looking at new schools and figuring out what would be best suited to her child, where the child's learning needs could be met, but also obviously all the factors of like location and affordability and, all that stuff had to also be factored in. But what we ended up also working on were, she was divorced and remarried. So there were also lots of other dynamics around step parenthood. Her ex-partner was also remarried. So there were lots of issues in terms of, this big decision of changing schools, but underneath that, there were all these other issues of collaborating with these, external parents, step parents, that kind of also needed to be addressed in order to just help their life run more smoothly and help her parent her child and her child feel, that their needs were being met. And so that's an example of just, the context of what we were dealing with. And what we ended up doing was we researched and found several schools that would tick all the boxes that were required to tick. Her and her ex-husband had to kind of, each individually research them and go see them if possible so they could physically visit them. And then we ended up meeting. I met with her and I met with her and her current partner, her second husband, and I met with him and his current partner, his second wife, and we collaboratively kind of came up with a new, when they had gotten divorced, they had a parenting plan, but things had evolved and changed since that time. So we kind of created a new parenting plan that met their current needs. And then we met for several weeks after in order to come to kind of check in and make sure, these are the hiccups we saw, or this didn't work, or I want to be able to talk to my kid while they're with you. Like, can we have a set time, or does the set time, is that too strict? It's just kind of collaboratively spitballing so we can kind of see what is actually practical. Because I can have X, Y, and Z recommendations, but I'm not the one living the life. So any recommendation I make may or may not be applicable because it might not be practical to implement, right? So that's why coaching is so collaborative and dynamic. That's what I love about it. It's like, we co-create these strategies, but then they go out and they see for the week between sessions what actually is going to work and what isn't. And so that part of the nuance of coaching is like coming back. And, one of the things that's so interesting with working with new clients is they always come back and they're like, they're afraid to say what didn't work, or that they didn't do the homework, or they didn't, they didn't find that thing we came up with was helpful. And I'm always like, that's where the meat is. That's what I want to know. It's not, you're not going to be in trouble, or you're not going to be like scolded for, if you aren't implementing the strategies that we come up with, then that's great information for us to have, because then we need to go back to the drawing board and see what is standing in your way, right? What was it too early in the morning that we asked you to do this writing task? Is writing just not your thing and you're never going to do it no matter what time of day it is? Is noticing things, not something that you want to do, and it's more practical, like every morning coming up with a routine that you follow every day, so that's part of the coaching work, is where kind of that magic exists, is where you find, the things that work for each individual. And that's why coming back after a week and kind of reporting back what worked and what didn't work is so effective in my experience.
I love that. Thank you for illustrating that. I think that was so useful to just think about this, like, sort of process that you're referring to. And I also picked up on what I'd read in your bio, where you spoke about like being informed by a kind of systemic, like a systems approach. I think that's so useful as well.
Yeah.
I think it's so rare to have a practitioner who would do what you did, where you brought in the step parents on both sides, and you've got that collaboration within the system itself, so that it's not just the person who comes for the coaching and you collaborating, but that there's an entire system that is actually collaborating to create a better working system. I really, really like that idea. And I think, so many families can benefit just from any support at this point. I mean, I think we are so unsupported in our modern life as parents, full stop. I think in some ways, what I think neurodiversity has brought to the entire sort of field is an emphasis on saying, this is about scaffolding and supporting. We're not just stopping at the pathologizing part, right? We're not just saying, okay, you've got a diagnosis, now you're in that bucket and goodbye, see you later. It's the only reason we diagnose, the only reason we even think about difference, or the only reason we need to even use terms like neurodiverse, is so that we can see that there is better approaches to use with these individuals to get the best out of them. And that when we can, that everybody actually benefits. Everybody feels more held and supported, and we all actually can work together. So yeah, I really do love what you were speaking about. It really sounds amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, I think what you were just kind of referencing, that isolation that especially young parents feel whether their child is neurodiverse or not is hugely important. We are raising children, and yet you can often feel so kind of, on the margins of your greater family or your friend group or your work colleagues that are, now your role has shifted because you're now a mother or a father. So I think, one of the working with relationship and coaching people on their connections to other is, especially in the neurodivergent population, is a crucial part of my practice, because neurodivergent people have already been marginalized for the most part and have felt quite othered usually their whole life. So it's really kind of diving in and kind of assessing where in which they can find connection. And sometimes it's not, those typical face-to-face, person-to-person, real life, like connections where you're in the same room as people. Sometimes for teenage neurodivergent kids, it's online friends. And that's also like helping parents see that, yes, maybe he or she doesn't actually physically haven't met this person face to face, but that's a real relationship for your child.
Mm.
And that's really important for them, because that might be the only person they speak to on a daily basis that they feel like they can trust and they identify with. So it's also sometimes shifting our own, historical experience so that we can relate better to our own, to the kids we're raising.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I have one last question for you. So late diagnosed women with ADHD, huge numbers of women getting diagnosed now in the last few years with ADHD. And yeah, I mean, obviously I work a lot with moms, so I also see how that impacts motherhood and how, maybe you can correct me, but sensory issues and how that sort of the Venn diagram of sensory issues in ADHD, and how so much of parenting is like dealing with sensory overload at various points, like, I don't think,
and your sensory world greatly shifts when you become a new parent.
Yes.
Right. So
that's quite a thing. So talk to me about your experience in that field.
Yeah, that's one of my newer-ish special interests, is this demographic of women diagnosed late in life, whether it's, and it tends to be it's still kind of a newish thing that people are studying. So the research is kind of noticing, well, it's twofold. One, there was a huge group of women who are now adults, whether they're 60, 50, 40, 30, or 25, who got missed, right? Who just weren't being flagged by the preschool teachers or the primary school teachers or the high school teachers for whatever reason. Or the doctors or whoever, was first flagging all the boys that were being assessed. They were not flagging the girls. And that's partially because sometimes we have the ADHD has kind of been identified as being like, either you're the airy-fairy kind of like spacey, mind wandering person, or you're the bouncy ball energizer bunny that, and so people were identifying boys more because they were standing out as the were the hyperactivity, as opposed to the space cadet daydreaming person was kind of falling through the cracks. And that dichotomy was tending to be seen as more boy girl. But also, so now they have also identified that there seems to be some when you have huge hormone shifts, so that would be adolescence, motherhood, and then menopause, your symptoms tend to ramp up. So your own noticing or your own capacity to manage your symptoms of neurodiversity tend to be exacerbated when your hormones go through a big shift. So that would especially apply to your people who are becoming mothers, demographic of your clientele, because obviously, there is a huge hormone shift when you're pregnant and then right when you have babies. And then if you have more than one, that hormone shift happens again for the second child or the third child. So, and as you spoke to, also the sensory needs or your sensory profile, maybe you coped with your neurodivergence well between the ages of 0 to 30 or 35. And then suddenly you have this baby and the baby cries and needs their diaper changed or their nappy changed and spits up and needs to be fed lumpy or gross food that you would rather not interact with. So a lot of those sensory things are suddenly being activated and flagged in your own sensory profile that you have never had to deal with before motherhood came into your existence. So yeah, there are a lot of young mothers being diagnosed, and I think also the tendency that I see is that young motherhood, the demands placed on you also shift a lot. So if you were a working person and you were married to another working person, suddenly having a baby shifts that dynamic, right? So maybe you take time off, maybe you don't go back to work, maybe you do, but in all of that, you suddenly have this new child to take care of, and a lot of that burden tends to fall on the mom, whether rightly or wrongly. It is that mental load we all speak of. So yeah, that kind of also exacerbates ADHD symptoms, because suddenly you have to not only think of the life you have that encompasses work and relationships and yourself, but it has this new thing that's a living, breathing, dependent thing that needs to have their own, daily, weekly needs met.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I think what's so interesting about what you said also is like this idea of like, when women come to get diagnosed, it's almost like we've got to a point where our internal experience is so hard to ignore that it's like we have to acknowledge it. We have to take it seriously. And it feels like, I mean, maybe this is to do with our hormones, and I mean, obviously it's to do with our hormones, but like, it also feels like those times of like peak hormonal experiences that you mentioned, it's almost like the membrane gets thinner, the sort of capacity to manage those emotions is thinner. I think,
Yeah.
I think this has a lot to do with socialization as well. Like, I think, like, I'm thinking about like even just boys and girls in school and how they get treated differently by teachers, and how they all get, looked at as someone that needs to be assessed early in the schooling. I just get the feeling that girls are taught from a young, not I get this feeling. We know that girls are taught from a young age to kind of moderate their internal experience.
Mask. Yeah.
Yeah. And also to be considerate of others more, to sort of seek, to
100%.
look
Yeah.
outside of themselves, to say like, how's everyone else doing? How is my behavior affecting everybody else? And sort of modulating that more, I think, than boys are taught to do that. And so it's almost like, that's part of why this is so unseen until later on, where it's kind of unavoidable and, hard to ignore.
Yes. 100%. Yeah. So yeah, we know that, right? We know that girls are really taught to be maternal and be nurturing, and boys are taught to be more physical and not, be as in touch with their emotions. And I think, we are shifting that, right? We are trying to have girls be more robust and more physical and more dynamic in a physical and kind of athletic way, and for boys to be more in touch with their emotions and more outward focusing. But those are very entrenched social norms. So it takes a while to kind of uproot them. And yeah, I think, when suddenly you have a baby, or suddenly you're going through menopause, or so, like your capacity, that membrane you spoke of, it is thinner, right? You're suddenly you are holding space and kind of, managing a lot more, and your capacity therefore is diminished, and you kind of are like, I can't do all of this, so I need help. And that's when we see a lot of women who are late diagnosed kind of saying, this is not manageable. So what it doesn't mean that they didn't have ADHD before. It just means that they were so good at kind of what I call white knuckling it. You're like, you're there and you're driving and you're like, this is really hard, but I'm going to get through it. And then suddenly it's like, I cannot do this.
Yeah.
There is something I'm struggling more than my peers around me.
Yeah.
So that's what we
Totally.
often see.
And the white knuckling, I feel like, is so much about like, I can't make this someone else's problem. Like this is just my thing that I've got to deal with on my own. Like, and I really do feel like there is this sort of inherent or unspoken sort of promise that we make where we're like, okay, I'm just going to take this on and work extra hard to just manage everything. And it might feel unmanageable, but the most important thing is that I don't make it any harder for anyone else. Like, and so a lot of people, I mean, it obviously comes with a crisis as well, who then get diagnosed, but it's such a relief then to finally hear that this is not something that you just have to deal with. It's actually, there's support. There's someone who could at least just see you and say, I know this is hard for you. Like that is just in itself so liberating for so many women.
Yeah. I think also for the later diagnosed women, what I hear over and over again is like, oh my gosh, people just always told me I was so dramatic, and it's like, yes, maybe your response was quite extreme, but that's because for you, it was like you went from like coping to not coping. And then that not coping was, that was really not coping. That wasn't just like, oh, I'm losing my keys. That was like, I've my car is somewhere else and I've made all these, poor decisions, which I acknowledge, but also which like have really made life difficult, right? It's not just like I misplaced my keys. It's like now there are 10 other steps between me and driving that car that have suddenly made it so that this is a huge hurdle to overcome. Not just like I'm going to go get my spare set of keys and worry about finding my original set tomorrow. It's like by the time a lot of the late diagnosed women are coming for help, it is like they have been struggling for years and there are, huge patterns to try and override and kind of dig through to get them to the point where they are like, oh, I can do this. It's just, I never knew how hard this was because I always thought I was making this up. So that's what's like kind of heartbreaking is that they have internalized a lot of shame and they have internalized a lot of struggle because they just thought they were kind of having a harder time than most people, but they didn't realize like the harder time they were having was something that was neurologically
Thank
different.
You so much for listening to On the Couch with Carly. If something in this episode resonated with you or made you feel less alone, that means the world to me.
And the emotional regulation piece, I think, is so
Spotify,
key.
And now
could you share with some
YouTube
with some like
exclusive
I don't
content
know,
and
maybe this is
resources,
too
visit
sort
our
of,
website at
sort of
onthecouchwithcarly.com.
point to ask you, but like
if you enjoyed today's
couple of like go-to emotional regulation strategies that you would offer a neurodivergent mom or someone who realizes that they kind of
care of yourself,
have big responses, but that they are also just really struggling with their emotions because life is hard. What are some of the tools that you use to teach people about emotional regulation or how to improve that for themselves?
So I think one of the first strategies is to really track them, because I think it's oftentimes we see ourselves blowing up, especially if we have younger children in that suicide hour. So it's like, how can you, or the witching hour, sorry, I don't know if suicide hour
No, it's fine. I know, I don't know
but,
if it's but we do say that.
I mean, my kids are teenagers now, so, I don't have young kids anymore, but I often get new moms or later, women with young children who really struggle in that, time from the kids coming home to time that they're, getting bathed and ready for bed. That's when they really are like, oh, my cup is empty and I am operating on fumes, and it's just like the smallest thing. My kid suddenly is like, oh, I have a project tomorrow, or, oh, I don't like this, what you made for dinner. Or, oh, I don't want to, lay the table, or whatever it is you've asked them to do for, a little bit of help, that they just, that explosive emotional dysregulation just happens. So tracking it in terms of time of day and what tends to happen right before. Is it like, can you sense it in your body? Do you first get hot? Do you have like a buzzing sensation? Does your heart start to race? Do you feel, any kind of bodily sensations? To try and kind of build your awareness so that before those emotional explosions happen, you can kind of take yourself away from the situation. So like, be like, oh, guys, mom senses she's getting a little bit hot under the collar, or I need to go take a time out so that I can regulate myself. And like, one of my moms, she was going through menopause with young kids, and we came up with the strategy that she would, if the kids weren't in the kitchen, she would just open the freezer while she was having like a hot flash, and she would just scream into the freezer, not in front of her kids, obviously, but just like, so she would have this blast of cold air that would kind of like help her snap out of it. But she would also let out a shout so that she could kind of get this feeling of release. So, I mean, those are just small examples, but it can be anything. It can be going on walks. It can be having a bath. It can be, really taking time for yourself, so that when you feel those moments of, people depending on you, and your capacity is maybe diminished, that you've shored your capacity up, and your ability to hold space for a crying toddler, or a grumpy, 8-year-old, that you have it within your reserves. And I think a lot of it is about kind of speaking it aloud to your peers, because, there's so much stigma around postpartum. Well, do you guys call it postpartum depression or antenatal depression? There's so much stigma around all of these things, that if we have relationships who are also who are in the same phase of life, just saying, hey guys, I'm really struggling. I wanted to like throttle my child today, and for people to be caring and connected, not to be like, oh, I'm going to go call the authorities, but to say, oh my gosh, I have that all the time too. Like that 5 right before dinner's ready hour, where my partner maybe isn't home yet, and I'm feeding them, and I'm wrapping up my workday, and I'm this, that, and the othering, where it's like, the slightest provocation just sets me off. It's like, you're not alone, and you have the resources to manage it.
Yeah, that's really all excellent. And I just want to pick up on what you spoke about as well, because it feels like it really ties in with the idea that very often we explode as a stress response, actually, and that stress is often created by a sensory system that is overloaded. And so I think the neurodiverse literature is so useful, because it teaches us about our sensory systems, and it teaches us about sensory diets, and where do we might have different thresholds on different sensory systems. Like, I know for me, there's something about being hot that really just takes me over the edge. So like, if I'm trying to get my child in her car seat, and she's kicking and moaning and screaming, and it's like this fight of trying to get this little body inside her car seat with that stupid thing that they make so incredibly hard to put together. Like, we're trying to, it's like an intelligence test. I'm like, and then, but if it happens like a puzzle. Yeah. If it happens to like, if the clouds part and the sun starts to bake down on me at the exact moment that I'm dealing with that, I just can't.
Already hot.
It's just like overload. And
it's like, actually open the car doors, let the car air out.
Just like noticing that is so important, to realize that you're also just a human being. You also only have the capacity that you have. And the thing that you said, which is so beautifully put, like, what do I need to give myself? What do I need to offer myself so that I can come back to this role with a renewed space, a capacity to then offer that emotional regulation for my toddler, or be available so that grumpy 8-year-old can vent and I cannot find that too overwhelming. So I think that's really excellent advice. So thanks, Suna. It's so nice to see you. And please,
Thank you,
for my
Carly.
listeners, if anyone wants to contact you, I'm going to put all your details on the show notes, but just where can they find you if they want to look up work with you?
Yeah, great. You can find me on Instagram at nd.coach.suna. That's ND coach SUNA, and or Suna Hall on Facebook or WhatsApp. Facebook or LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay, great. And any particular programs that you're offering at the moment? Like, I think I saw something about you doing groups at the moment. Like, is anything that you're running?
Yes. So I just finished a 6-week, we're calling them coaching circles, but essentially they're like small group sessions around late diagnosed women with ADHD, late diagnosed ADHD women, which was amazing and really fabulous. I'm going to be offering that again in 2026. I'm also going to be offering ones for men and or parents with kids diagnosed with ADHD and autism. So young kids, I'll do like a cutoff of, age group for the parents. So it'll be like kids ages 3 to, I think it'll be about 9 or 10, and then 11 to teenagehood for ADHD and autism of the parents of kids diagnosed. So yeah, those are all happening in the new year. The women's course, coaching circle, I won't offer till later because I've just run it in November. But yeah, the others the men's coaching circle I'll offer first, and then the parents one kind of coming into end of summer, early fall, and then the women's one again later.
Okay, fantastic. Awesome. So if you're interested in any of Suna's work, please find her and contact her, and maybe just get on a mailing list or something so that when her workshops that you're interested in come about, or her circles start again, that she can then send you all the info. I do think there'll be lots of people that will be interested in looking you up. So thank you so much for coming today.
Great. Thank you so much. It was a lovely conversation. I really appreciate it.
I wish you so well with everything that you're doing in the coaching world, and yeah, thanks so much for being on.
Thank you, Carly.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to On the Couch with Carly. If something in this episode resonated with you or made you feel less alone, that means the world to me. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and now in video format on YouTube. For exclusive content and resources, visit our website at onthecouchwithcarly.com. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider leaving a rating or review. It really does help others discover our safe space for authentic conversation. Until next time, please take good care of yourself. I can't wait to be back on the couch with you again.